Welcome to the Indian Sun. I'm Indira Lysram. From starting the Spice Kitchen in Adelaide to cooking for Sir Donald Bradman, to her great cooking classes, to authoring two books, Ragini Dey has rich contributions to the culinary landscape of Australia. In fact, it has been said that Ragini Dey has taught Australians there is much more to the cuisine than the fiery curry. Let's get on to our conversation with Ragini Dey, one of Adelaide's finest chefs. Welcome, Ragini, and thank you for coming to our show.
Thank you, Indira. Pleasure to be here.
I'm going to start with your the early 1980s when you migrated to Australia, and you had a great hand in changing the perception of Indian food, since then to now, because the demographics have obviously changed as well. So, can you tell us about your experience in the food industry from then to now?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, especially in Adelaide, I think it was quite a fledgling food industry in that sense, not just Indian food, which of course was almost non-existent, but also, say, Italian food and Chinese food. Like Italian food, I think it was just spaghetti bolognese, and with the Chinese sort of sweet and sour kind of honey chicken, and things like that. So we have definitely come a long, long way with the migrants moving in a lot more as well. And I think the Australians have always had a very open mind to sort of taking on the different cuisines and cultures. And with that encouragement, really the whole scene is very different today.
Mm-hmm. And you have great experience working in India as well, isn't it, before you came here? So you've been traditionally a chef out and out, throughout your career.
I have, but actually I started, funnily enough, I did my chef's degree from Pusa, Delhi. But then after that, after some time, I actually got a job in the Mumbai College of Catering and Nutrition. And so I worked there for 4 years. And in that time, I also did my teacher's degree for teaching cookery. So it was actually, so that's sort of been also a base. And that really came in handy when over here I felt the need to maybe run some cooking classes or do some teaching that while I didn't sort of teach in a TAFE or a formal sort of setup like that, I did a lot of classes with the gas company, Australian Gas Company, and with the WEA, which is sort of like an adult education program here. And so that all my previous experience really stood me in good stead.
Mm. And so when you moved to Adelaide, then how long did it take for you to start the Spice Kitchen, which is such a famous name now?
Well, we started in 89 and we moved to Adelaide in 82. So that was sort of 7 years later that we did that. And before that, I did a variety of jobs because it was sort of 82 was a little bit difficult, I think, for Indian chefs to get, something, suitable jobs. And I sort of landed up in aged care. So for 11 years, I actually worked in retirement villages and nursing homes and aged care, which also gave me a completely different sort of, look at the food scene. Because in India, I had nothing, never ever had anything to do with the older, sort of catering and, for older people. And it was a great eye-opener. And I think that now, even though I don't have much to do with that now, but, with all the sort of things that we hear about and see what's happening in aged care, I'm glad that I had that little experience.
Fantastic. And so, you've also started your cooking classes, right? You said to bridge the gap in understanding Indian food. So what were some of the gaps, for people?
Well, there was, if you say gap, it was all a gap. There was really, all the Indians, most of the sort of restaurants at that time, they had this basic concept of two sauces, and which actually, unfortunately, dodgy restaurants even do that these days. So, you have this 300-page menu, or rather 300 items on your menu. And it doesn't matter, what you want, because you'll have the same sauce and you'll get tomato filled in one and maybe cream added to another sort of same sauce to make another dish, or you put some cashew nut puree, or, you sort of basically add some chilies. So basically, from, you might be making a vindaloo or you might be making a butter chicken, but you're using exactly the same base. And that's really disgusting. So I think most Australians, when they ate that, they weren't, clever enough or not, but educated enough, I should say, to actually discern what was happening there. And all they thought was, oh, Indian food just tastes all the same. Whether we have, 5 dishes or 10 dishes, is the same flavor. We're getting into everything. And in the early days, even though, I think there was, a very, very fledgling vegetarian sort of food culture coming along, but mostly it was meat. And so, they were eating this mass quantity of meat with a very tiny bit of the cereal, so very tiny rice, or not even maybe in a little bit of bread. And the whole balance was completely wrong. And so they were thinking that Indian food's too harsh, too rich, too, everything, because it's not this light and lovely cuisine, which is actually not true at all, as you know. So I think that was a major gap that needed to be exposed, so people could actually realize that Indian food, first of all, is so diverse, and the diversity comes from its regionality, because it's different from region to region. It's not just north and south, but it's north, south, east, west, and everything in the middle is also different. And so, once people sort of understand, they're exposed to so many thousands of dishes. It's not, your 5 different things that you have in every Indian restaurant. So that, was a major, I think, something that people were ignorant about. And I really wanted to sort of bring that into focus, that the restaurant cuisine is not Indian cuisine. It's maybe a reflection of 5 different things that have become, popular through the times. And that's nothing to do with just Australia, because Australia, America, England, even India, in those days, if you went into a restaurant, that's what you would find. It's only very recently that even in India, and they call them ethnic restaurants, that the different cuisines of the South and Bengal, the West, have now gained in popularity as restaurants in their own right.
So we can now safely say that people have gone beyond butter chicken and Rogan Josh.
We hope so, definitely. But still, those 2 items, and there's nothing wrong with butter chicken and Rogan Josh. So don't get me wrong. It's just that, there is so much beyond that. So it's a bit sad when people just think that, oh, this is a very limited cuisine. It may be nice, but at the same time, it is very limited. And, they sort of look at other cuisines and other Asian cuisines, for instance, and think, oh, this is really healthy, the Vietnamese or the Thai and Indian food is it may be delicious, but it's very heavy and it's going to make us put on all these calories. And so that's sort of really unjustified and not true.
Very true. And, we're experiencing this new trend in Melbourne, at least, of Indo-Chinese. Is that picking up in Adelaide as well?
Some restaurants have it, but it's not huge, because I think, we have actually such a good or variety of real Chinese restaurants doing, the different styles. So you have your Cantonese and Szechuan and everything. And while the Indians like, something hot and spicy, so I think the Szechuan, restaurants give them that. So, and it's only probably the vegetarians that want, their Chinese to be totally vegetarian and have that confidence if they go into an Indo-Chinese restaurant that they're not going to have chicken stock or something, added, even if they can't tell really what they're eating. So from that point of view, and of course, the one people like us who've grown up in India and had, because I also lived in Calcutta for a long time, and the Chinese food there we think is second to none. But it's a very different kind of Chinese compared to real Chinese, what we find here or in China, for instance. So yes, I think in Adelaide, this trend is not that huge, but there are definitely a few restaurants that are doing it.
Okay. You've had such a rich experience in the field of food, but I would like to know how is it cooking for Sir Donald Bradman?
Oh, it was a bit scary because I was working in Government House at that time, and we used to have the state dinners. And of course, I didn't even actually realize, I think, until, almost the last minute when we were given the seating plan and it had all the people's names on it, like who was eating, who was who. And I said, oh my God, it's Donald Bradman. And then, as luck would have it, when we opened Spice Kitchen, he actually lived just down the road from us, and his son would bring him. And in the beginning, I didn't even, because in Government House, actually never saw him there. I mean, I knew that, he was there and I had cooked and he'd eaten that. But when we started Spice Kitchen, and I was mainly in the kitchen, so I didn't sort of really come into contact that much with the people. But I very much doubt whether I would have recognized him, even if I had sort of, particularly gone out to see him. But my dad one day was there and he said, who that is on table one? And I said, who's that? And he said, that's a Donald. And, like his son had brought him. And I believe he had come quite frequently because his son enjoyed our food and apparently brought his dad along. So that was the next, quite sort of to know that he came out of his own choice rather than, he went to Government House and that wasn't really anything to do with me as such, except that I got to cook for him. But to know that he chose to come to eat Indian food at Spice Kitchen, that was a huge honor.
Tell us about one or two other memorable, incidents in your life.
Oh, that's a difficult question. So there's been lots of memorable occasions, I think. But if it's to do with food, I think one time, talking of cricket, so we'll stick to that. So the World Cup was on, I think the recent one, well, not that recent, the one before, I don't know, it was about maybe 10 years, 9-10 years, or something like that. And we actually transformed our whole restaurant into a cricket pitch. So we had with nets and we had a bowling, the pitch, and we had stumps, and all the menu was done with sort of all the cricket terminology in mind. And it just got everyone's imagination. And we even had the Indian media from India sort of reporting on that. So yeah, that was quite interesting. I mean, people came from everywhere to sort of see, what's happening here. And if they wanted, they could sort of, have a go with the cricket ball and bat. But also the first customer we ever had in Spice Kitchen was Barry Jarman, who was captain of the Australian team at one time. And so he very much also supported us, and he would be there in, this time that we did these dinners for the World Cup. So, and then we chose not just Indian food, but for South Africa, I think when they were playing, we did the bunny chow, which of course is the curry in a bread loaf. So yeah, that was sort of an interesting thing from the culinary and cultural viewpoint. What we did, and of course, I can't go past that I think it was 2009 that we won the best Indian restaurant in all of Australia nationally with the restaurant and catering awards. So that, I must say, also sort of definitely was a huge honor. But the main thing, I think, not so many. These things are sort of something big and they stand out, but really just changing the sort of landscape of Indian cooking, because it's actually thousands of people who've done our cooking classes just in the restaurant. And in those days when cooking classes were not popular, or that's not something that one did in a restaurant really, I think we were definitely the sort of trendsetters, because we did a lot of things that today are run of the mill. But in those days, no one ever did that, because we also started our own spice blends that we have even now. Because when we went shopping, there was nothing that, apart, you couldn't even get basic spices, but if you went to get a ready-to-use mix for convenience, there were some really revolting things. There was nothing like what we have now in the supermarket, where you have a separate Indian, aisle. But so we started our own blend, which was sort of gluten-free. It didn't have any preservatives, MSG, gluten, no sugar or salt. So even in those days, we were sort of focusing on the healthy and natural sort of aspects of Indian food.
So where did you source your spices in the early days?
Well, most of them in those days we used to get from Sydney.
Yeah.
because there was much more. I mean, actually you could get mostly everything, and then a few things you couldn't get we got from India, but mostly it was pretty good. That way, I mean, even though, I mean, this is wholesale, so even though those things were not available in the normal shopping retail, but you could actually, I mean, source them. Not, it wasn't so difficult. One could do it if one like persevered. I mean, really, there wasn't anything very much that one couldn't get, even in those early days, in a wholesale sort of scenario.
Interesting. I've seldom come across, Indian women winemakers or Indian women chefs, and you are one of the few. It's really interesting. Do you think women chefs handle pressure in the kitchen much better than men?
I don't know if it's better or worse. I mean, I wouldn't like to. I think that's when you say no comment. But
Yeah.
I think it's to do with the individual.
Yeah.
It's not. I mean, generally, I mean, I wouldn't like to generalize and say, "Oh, women are better at this or men are better at that." But I think if you have a cool and calm temperament, and I think you have to have that if you are going to be, because there's a lot of pressure, as you said. It is very true, and everything happens in those 2 hours. You might be prepping the whole day, but finally the 2 hours is what makes or breaks your whole service or what sort of food you turn out. So if you can like handle that, then I think you might be a man or a woman, it doesn't matter at all. But you just have to be basically cool and calm and know that, well, there won't be any point getting into a flap or throwing things around. I mean, things have changed again in the kitchen hugely since the early days of my, sort of doing my training, because now there's a lot more awareness of, how really, I mean, it's not by screaming and shouting and, banging pots around, you're not going to get a better result, or you're not going to make people more comfortable. And unless your team is comfortable, they're not going to produce their best either. I think there's a lot more awareness of that rather than, you frighten them to, death and then they'll do something good. I don't think anyone thinks that anymore. So, so it's a huge change in the culinary landscape in restaurants and kitchens. Yeah.
What are the few lessons that a home cook can learn from a restaurant chef?
Well, I don't know. I think it's the other way around, actually. I mean, the balance is definitely on the other side. But if I have to answer that question, then I would say things like, working methodically, food safety, really, I mean, maybe knowing that apart from, because when it comes to the variety of cooking, I think generally speaking, there are bad home cooks as well. So it's not that all home cooks are fantastic, but generally speaking, home cooks, I think, have a bigger repertoire than restaurant. I mean, restaurant chefs may know a lot of other things, but what they cook day in and day out is probably more limited than what the home cooks do. So, and home cooks, I think, tend to cook a lot more seasonally also. So I think that's something really, really good from that point of view. But generally, if I have to answer your question, I would say that it's all to do with maybe even knife skills. That's something most Indian cooks at home, not everyone, because I'm sure there are people who have beautiful knives, but most of them, don't see the importance of a really sharp knife, for instance. And that, things like that can make a lot of difference in your work and prep and your eventual dish. So, something can take 2 minutes to cut if you've got a fabulous knife. And I think that's maybe something that one should invest in, which usually in restaurant kitchens, you'll find that people have good knives and keep their knives nice and sharp. Just a little thing like that. But yeah.
Okay, in relation to that, a question has cropped up. What are your favorite ingredients and tools in the kitchen?
Well, ingredients, I would have to say spice, because other produce, of course, everything generally that everyone else enjoys. I think I like all the things. But spice is one thing I cannot do without. And I think spice is something that if used in balance, because that's really important. It's not that, the more you put in, the better dish is going to taste. So, but I'm a firm believer of, I think heightening the taste of anything, whether it's savory or sweet, or even bread. I mean, a touch of spice just gives you that little edge, takes your food to another level. Doesn't have to be Indian either. Now more and more we are seeing, people using spice in every other cuisine as well. And I think that's, spice, one, of course, it's fabulous for taste. But second, we have always in India known that spice is actually medically good for us. And, it's something that we take for granted and eat for taste, but it's actually doing good stuff for us in our body and in our health. So it's something that's really, really important for me. As an ingredient, I couldn't do without spice.
Okay. And can you tell us something about the beer and barbecue festival and what you are bringing to the festival?
Okay, so beer and barbecue is the first time actually that we are going to do it, because we've sort of seen it happening for a few years and somehow never got to do it. But this time the organizers actually asked us if we would like to come on board. And we definitely, said yes, because most people think of Indian food again as just curries. And in fact, I just had a lunch with Tasting Australia recently, which the theme of which was I hate curry. And everyone was sort of saying, well, she makes a whole livelihood on curry and she hates curry. What the hell is this? But it was actually, obviously to do with that there are so many other styles of cooking in the Indian cuisine. It's not just, one kind of curry. So barbecue actually has been very much a part of the Indian scene, from the earliest of days. 7th, 8th centuries, they were, in fact, the earliest times, they probably cooked, killed, some venison or something like that on the hunt, deer, and marinated and just roasted it, which was probably the basic barbecue. So even before anyone ever made a curry, I'm sure they were barbecuing. But also then with the Mughals from the Middle East and the Genghis Khan from the East, all that sort of, I think, brought also a more refined barbecue technique. And the tandoor itself, which of course is the clay oven, which you don't only make bread, but you can also, of course, use for cooking meat and vegetables. India being such a vegetarian country as well, there are all these vegetables that are cooked in the charcoal, cooked in the tandoor, which is not something that's done in other barbecue sort of recipes, in other global sort of recipes. So definitely Indian barbecue is not just meat, it's also vegetable. And so we hoping at the Beer and Barbecue Festival to sort of showcase some of these dishes that people may not be familiar with. Everyone's familiar with tandoori chicken or maybe even, a lamb cutlet or something like that. But I don't think beyond that, restaurants really have done much to showcase Indian barbecues.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up this interview with one last question on the Spice Kitchen, given that it's become such an iconic name. Tell us about what are the best-selling spices and what is its key to success?
Well, key to success, I would say, sort of persevere, because, you have to have the passion, first of all. And I think we did not think so much on a commercial sort of basis, because if it was just to make money, there's a much easier road. Just cook more butter chicken and more butter chicken, and, you'll make your money and that's it. But if you, like me, have this passion to sort of showcase real Indian food, and it's not, real Indian food may not be something that's instantly popular everywhere. So, we have something like, say, the bitter gourd, for instance, or okra, which are cult vegetables in India, but just give it to a first-time Australian and he or she's not going to go mad, the first time they eat it. But if they, slowly exposed and different recipes are sort of showcased of those difficult ingredients even, then slowly the scene does change a little bit. So I was very much into that. And I think, the Spice Kitchen ran for about 26 years. So there was time, and we accomplished, I think, a lot in that time to, change people's minds on what Indian food really is. That I think is that perseverance. One has to, really push at it. One can't give up, even if, you sort of along the way think, oh, this is too hard. There must be an easier way. There probably is, but I don't know it. And sorry, your other part of the question was
best-selling spices.
Oh, best-selling spices.
Mm.
I'll have to say the butter chicken mix
Okay.
because people do know about it.
Okay.
But if you just talk about individual spices, then well, that's a difficult question again. Green cardamom is something. I mean, the ones that people know about, the cinnamon and the pepper, that of course, and the cloves, that people already know about. But the ones that they don't know about and are learning, then I would say the cardamoms, the green cardamom. We, in the initial days, we had the black cardamom and the green cardamom in a dish, for instance. And I had an instance where somebody quite old actually came up to me and said, I don't want to make a big noise, but what I found in my food. And she thought it was a cockroach or a beetle. And it was a black cardamom. So, as I said, there were easier ways of not just forget about putting the black cardamom. Why do you want to do that? But I didn't want to, because that black cardamom has such a beautiful flavor. And I wanted to, let that dish come into its own with that, fabulous taste. But yes, things have changed a lot since those days. But just to give you an instance, but at the moment, as your question, I think the green cardamom in the more unusual spices, the 5-spice mix, which is the Bengal Panchforan, which of course is your mix of the 2 mustards, black and yellow, the fenugreek, the fennel, and the nigella. This is something that people are liking to use. As a fajita, that's the 3rd one, which probably I would say is pretty popular.
Mm. Thank you so much, Ragini. You have such a wealth of knowledge and experience. I wish I could go on and on talking to you, but we have time for that much today. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, Indira. As I said, it was a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you once again as well. And if you ever come to Adelaide, come and see us.
Definitely. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.